All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Basically EMS. I'm pretty excited. We got the whole gang back together, so hopefully this is going to be a pretty fun one. I'm Chris. I'm a paramedic and an EMS instructor.
I'm Mike. Been teaching here for a few years, flight paramedic now.
I'm Cody. I've been also teaching here for a few years, and I am a firefighter.
I'm Wade. I'm a paramedic. I'm also an instructor here.
Yeah, anybody that's watching this that has watched a lot of our videos, it's a lot of the YouTube faces, so it should be pretty fun. Today we're going to be talking about difficult patients, which I don't feel like we talk a lot about in school, and I don't feel like we really prepare people really well for, because all the patients you have in school are just like, well, you know, what's going on? Oh, I have chest pain, and they're just going to answer your questions, and they're real sweet and nice, and that's just not always realistic. So a couple different things that we'll talk about. And we're going to kind of start with patients that have some sort of impairment, because that's something we see pretty often. It's going to be a little bit less lecture-y today, more storytelling, hopefully, for you guys listening. So, so speech impaired patients and sight impaired patients. We've all been on those before. So I think the book typically says for speech impaired patients, maybe give them something to write. This would also be hearing impaired patients. Kind of those kind of go together. So maybe give them something to write down so you can communicate with them there, because hopefully they're able to visualize what you're writing. Do you guys you guys know any sign language? I know that's something that some people learn.
No, not unfortunately.
Yeah, it's not
Probably
something.
should.
Yeah, I mean, it's helpful, especially if you know you have, maybe your district has somebody that you know for sure calls regularly that you could use that. I mean, even if you just learn some basic medical sign language and like how to spell, you could get pretty far with that. Yeah. What else? And you guys have any other things you can do?
I think the biggest thing is honestly just being patient with these patients, taking your time if they can allow it, right? If they're critical and we need things that need to get done, obviously we're going to treat that. But having a sense of patience and knowing your resources can go a long way. Most agencies now have some sort of translating service that you can utilize, either via phone, FaceTime, things like that, apps that agencies will use, as well as just utilizing family members, caretakers, caregivers, things like that. That's what I've generally used in the past, is just being able to find somebody on site that's usually takes care of this patient, or is generally going to be very well versed in that patient's condition, and they can tell you pretty much anything you need to know about that patient.
And sometimes you got to get creative too. You're kind of talking like, chalkboard, whiteboard. Excuse me. I've used the narrative tab of my chart before and typed back and forth with patients. But yeah, you're right. There's always resources. You just got to be familiar with them. We'll talk about language barriers later, but a lot of the refugee folk, they also have a point of contact here. So they have someone on the phone. You can have someone on the phone translating. Obviously we've got to get patient permission for the HIPAA violation things. We don't want to get too in the weeds with that, but you do have options. You just got to know what's there. And
letting the hospital know early that you have some sort of language barrier, whatever, speech
difficulty,
barrier, something, some sort of barrier.
Yeah, I even had a guy once, who's a truck driver, I think, who was on like a Zoom call with somebody, and then that person was on a phone call with us. So he was able to sign to that person who would relay it to us over the phone. We were talking on the phone to the person. We would say a response. She would sign it back to the patient. And that's how we were able to communicate. And that was something that the patient already had set up. So when we got there, we were kind of really surprised, because we walk up and he just hands us a phone. And the person's like, hey, call this phone number. And so we called on our personal phone, but it worked really well. So just like you said, use your resources. There's lots. I mean, we live in the modern age. There's lots of resources we can use for these patients.
One point that I think to bring up is one thing EMT school didn't prep me for was actually talking to people and talking to patients. It's very awkward, especially when you're on your first call with a crew that you've never met before, and your paramedic instructor or your paramedic, whoever's training you, is right over your shoulder, and you got to have a conversation with somebody you've never met. It's awkward. So doing with somebody that's impaired is even harder. But like Mike said, I think patience is key. And I've been on one call where the lady was deaf, and she actually had a full computer system to where we got there and she had typed it out. Now, she wasn't sick enough or hurt enough to not type. So depending on the call. It was really helpful for us. She just typed out what was going on.
And I think this is also kind of a general concept when we're talking about difficult patients in general is they get long language with patients is just because they may have some sort of speech impairment or something else doesn't mean that they aren't mentally all there, right? We need to treat them with respect. We need to treat them with compassion, just like we would with anybody else. I think sometimes people tend to get really burnt out with some difficult patients.
Like frustrated.
Frustrated. It's not necessarily at that patient in general, but if you see something like that on scene as your partner, maybe take over that call or, start to interject and pull that partner away and task them with something else.
And one thing too, like hopefully and most likely somebody on that call has been on this type of patient before and can give advice or just take over and use that as a learning opportunity to watch how they interact with that patient, take tips from it, and then after the call, talk to them about it. Like, hey, like what? Have you done this before? Like what helped? Like what tips do you have for me? So if I go on something like this again, just take it as a learning opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you're right. And there's a misconception too. Like one of the slides, it makes me chuckle in my head every time because it's just so disrespectful. But it's
exactly which one you're talking about.
Of people of hearing impairment or visual impairment have the same intelligence as normal people. That's the exact verbiage on that slide.
As normal
and
people.
It's one of those where it's like, don't.
Yeah.
You're advertising. I get like you maybe have to explain to some people, but you've been people long enough around people. You should know how to at least hopefully not be judgmental.
Yeah.
But we live in a weird time and age, so.
And I think a lot of people, especially when you're newer, you're trying to get a patient to the hospital. When it's not happening the way you want it to happen, they get really frustrated and they can't figure out the problem. So a lot of it's not necessarily towards that patient, but just take a step back, realize, we have resources, we have partners, we have, family members, things that we can do to help move these calls along. So.
One of the best parts of this job is that you have to get creative.
Oh, yeah.
Not every call is the same. It's not black and white. So when you get to these calls, you can get a little creative and figure out what to do, play with this, play with that, and figure out how you're going to get your questions answered and how you're going to treat this patient. But no call's the same.
I had one patient who was on the topic of not being able to speak. She was ALS or had ALS. So she was obviously pretty impaired just typically when it came to motor and then obviously verbally. Fortunately, her computer was working when we were there, but as we were leaving, and we got a refusal, she didn't want to go with us, but her computer battery was dying. And I had no idea how I was going to work around that situation because it's not even like it's not another language. It's not something I can pull my phone out and be like, what should we do, right? Like, you got to think through it. There's going to be difficult circumstances sometimes. Now, I was fortunate I didn't have to deal with it, but that's something that could happen, right? Yeah. If we're gauging on technology fails. So just keep that in mind too.
One thing that I always say is just keep it simple. I mean, as simple as if my patient can't talk to me, I am not afraid to show them a heart symbol and then point to them and give them a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Or initiate breathing. Good, bad, anything hurt. I'm not afraid to do that to keep it simple.
Yeah, obviously being respectful, but yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we've all probably done that at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one thing, if you're a student listening to this, like, we have to be very structured and rigid in how we teach assessment. And in some ways that does a disservice to people because, you go through a class, our class included, because we have to teach to registry standards. And so that's how it is. And you're going to go through and you're going to be like, okay, my scene size up and I'm going to do this. And then, okay, so I'm going to get my chief complaint. Sir, do you have any pain anywhere? And they can't answer. And it just derails people when they're new because they don't know what to do. Like they're so stuck in this mindset. And just by the nature of it, you have to be in that mindset for National Registry. But, if you're a student, you need to realize like we were saying, you can get creative, maybe not in class, but when you get out there and get creative and learn from the creative people around you, right? Like so much of what I learned for dealing with patients is watching somebody else do something when you're new and be like, oh, hey, that was a really good method beyond just, speech impaired, whatever. Yeah. Any patients. Because everything is so structured in class. It's so ABC cookbook recipes, and that's not real life. And so, like I said, if you're a student, when you get out there, feel free to, if you have to, be creative and be ready for that. And just like Cody was saying, that's why it's fun for us.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I say all the time, like, students love medical calls, students love trauma, experienced providers love medical. Yeah. Because trauma is very visual and straightforward and ABC 1, 2, 3. And medical, like you have to really be creative and think and use all your tools, right? And it's the same with assessment, right? Like
Absolutely.
as you get along, you're going to start. It's going to be kind of fun for these patients. You have to think outside the box.
Yeah. And then as much as there is to learn from other people, because definitely learning on the job, right? You can learn a lot about what not to do by watching people do things too, of like, well, that didn't work. Maybe we don't do that next time, and have the humility to step back and say, well, I screwed that up. Where can we do this next time?
Absolutely.
Especially watching those firefighters.
Yeah.
You learn a lot of what not to do.
You got to find out, then you'll know.
And then not being afraid, obviously we're going to learn a lot in those first couple of years as providers, but don't be afraid to learn from students and learn from new people as well. I've learned just as much from my trainees and my students that I did from my mentors, not Wade or Cody. But
fair enough.
You never trained me.
Well,
it shows.
He trains you every day.
It's a different kind of training.
Kind of training.
Train him on what not to do.
Yes,
Cody.
yes. But just don't be afraid to learn from people that are new to the field. Just because they're new doesn't mean they don't have a different set of experiences that you may not have. So I think just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, just work with what you got, be respectful, keep it simple,
Yeah.
and learn.
So kind of moving on, kind of fits the same thing, but you've got some language barriers too, right? So I think things are kind of going to apply similar to what we've already talked about. As far as, being creative, use your resources. Here in Boise, we have a lot of refugees. And so my experience is they typically have some sort of, like you were saying, like a phone call or a phone number they can call. Family members are good. I had one of my favorite experiences. There was a family actually pretty close to where we're shooting this right now, refugee family that my partner and I went on like 3 times in a week or so. And they had one kid that was like a school-age kid, like 3rd, 4th grade probably, who translated for us the whole time because mom was sick and then another sibling was sick. And it was cool to get to see that and how that kid stepped up and whatever. And like one of the most rewarding moments I've had in this career is like the 3rd time we're about to pull away and like the patriarch, the dad of the family, comes over and like gives us a hug and he's like, "Oh, you guys, you're our Boise brothers. Like you guys have been like taking care of us." So like it felt so rewarding. Where there's a lot of people that would struggle and dislike those kind of calls because it was more difficult, but we were patient. We took the time. We showed them that we cared, right? Like even if you're slow and you're struggling, if you can convey that, like, I'm here to help you and I care about you and I want to make you feel better and do the job that I need to do. It's going to translate for those people across all different languages, right?
Yeah. One thing I've always been told is like, and what I believe in is like, treat every patient like your family member.
Yeah.
Most difficult ones, the nicest ones, whatever, you treat them like your
the family members you like.
Yeah, those ones, yeah. And I've noticed a lot, like if we go to somebody who is speaking a different language, some providers will almost write it off because it's frustrating because you can't get your questions answered. You don't know how to help them because there's no communication, and it's just like, okay, let's just go to the hospital and we'll let the hospital run tests and they can figure it out and they don't even have to talk to you, right? And so it's, in my opinion, disrespectful. They don't mean to be, but if that was my mom who was speaking a different language, I would want that provider to do everything they can to make my mom feel comfortable, build some sort of rapport, and let her know that she's actually being taken care of because she's in a foreign country. Or if we went to a foreign country, I would want their providers to treat me like, oh, just because I don't speak your language, please still care about me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, think of it from their perspective. They're having a bunch of strangers walk into their house that don't speak the same language. They're asking them questions, potentially getting frustrated with them about what's
they're
going on.
They're already terrified because they're sick.
You got this guy with his mustache trying to talk to you, but
hair's falling out all the time.
It can be super frustrating on their end as well as our end if we don't have that communication. So just keep that in mind, that it can be frustrating for them.
And there are circumstances where the call is going to progress to a point where you have to get involved. And if you don't have time to contact somebody, you just got to fiddle your way through it. The baby that I was involved with delivering, the mother was Swahili speaking only. There's no fiddling your way through Swahili. That's just a tough.
But you don't know Swahili?
Not off the top of my head. I've been working on it though.
Conversational, but not quite fluent yet.
Not fluent for sure.
Can't read it.
Yeah, that's what it is. But it was difficult, and like, how do we convey, like, that's the most, I don't want to say vulnerable situation a woman could be in, right? I have your child that just came out of you. Here you go.
Mm-hmm.
now what do we do? Like, how do I comfort her?
Imagine the
get to next
anxiety
step?
and the stress that she already has. And then you don't speak her language. She has no idea if you're caring for her or not.
It's a good thing she didn't know I was a student either.
Yeah, and then, kind of back to resources too. One thing especially, because a lot of students listen to this, right? It's a stress for students. Like, if you're in my classroom and you're running a scenario and you pull out your phone, I'm going to be like, dude, really? Like, that's not okay here. Pull out your phone, use a translator app, use that kind of stuff on scene. Like,
100%.
that's a
Keeping it
huge
simple.
Use
resource.
dispatch. Dispatch is a
Yeah.
big helper in these situations because they can coordinate all that while you're dealing with the patient in front of you, and they can make phone calls, have somebody call you, and then get that process started if there's not a family member or somebody that's able to
Kind of building on
translate.
that, with your cell phone, it's a great utilized tool if you have service, right?
Yeah.
So I had a ejection call up at Lucky Peak, which is a local reservoir here. When we show up, there's a patient in the front seat, a person in the front seat. Patient was ejected through the back window. I was like, "Where's my patient?" He's like, "I don't know. He's walking around somewhere." Turns out that patient was Russian speaking only. Once again, can't fiddle my way through Russian. So we're trying to drive back. He's fighting me the whole time, trying to take the collar off. And, he wants water. Once I finally got into service and looked it up, he's asking me for water over and over. It's like, don't have it. We just got to get you a hospital. Well, this is also one of those of like reading mechanisms and how to train and treat something based on mechanism. A couple hours later, we were dropping off another patient. Sure enough, that patient comes walking around the corner, no collar, and he asks us where the bathroom was, which first of all was like, so you do speak English. just enough.
You got me.
And the nurse came running around, was like, where'd that guy go? I was like, back that way. And she's like, he has a C2 fracture. I was like, wow. Okay, so that was pretty serious. But like trying to convey like, no, you need to relax is really hard when, I don't know the extent of the damage, and it obviously was pretty large, just not visual at that time. So yeah, and that's where I wish I would have thought, use dispatch. Let's get something moving ahead of time. They can maybe help me out until I get to service.
Yeah.
I will say probably close to 80% of the time, foreign speaking patients typically have a translator on them or a family member that can help us out. So it is very easy, but there are that 20% where we have no resources. So keep it simple. Do your best to mimic whatever you're trying to get across to them and get answers. And you got to do your best.
Yeah,
Get
another
creative.
thing I always say with languages too, right? Like, I'm from Southern California. I knew a little bit of Spanish because I needed to, just based off of that, right? It's very common for for refugee populations or whatever, right? There might be a group of people that all move into one region for whatever reason, right? Their family starts, and then so they all go there. So, if you have a large contingent of Russian-speaking people in your district or in your area, have a little Russian dictionary, like English to Russian dictionary, or learn a little bit of basic Russian, whatever the language is, like we said before, right? The learning should never stop. And that's something you can do to really increase your patient care if you have those patients around, right? Like Santa Ana Fire Department famously they're now part of the Orange County Fire Authority, not Department Fire Authority.
The authority, yes.
Yeah. Half of their hiring test was in Spanish. Like your interview, half of it was in Spanish.
Wow.
Because it was a large Spanish-speaking population there, and so that was a requirement. And it was a fantastic fire department. They had great patient care, and it just shows kind of that was paramount to them, right? So if you're in that area that has that, it'd be a good idea to do that.
Not only does medicine progress, tactics progress, and equipment progresses, but the population progresses as well.
Yep, absolutely.
I had one call. I know I'm telling a lot of stories, but this is it was the pinnacle of a lot of problems at the same time. It was at a school for, I believe she was like 8 or 6, but a 6-year-old or 8-year-old girl seized. So she's postictal, not able to talk, found out she's deaf. She's so young she can't read or write. Family is Spanish speaking only. No one's on scene. I speak a little bit of Spanish, but not enough to really get through. So then I had to rely a lot on the more so on the nurse who was there and the school administrative staff, because this girl was scared of us. She has no idea who we are, but she knows them. So utilizing their presence. And then finally mom showed up, and then, sister was also with her. So fortunately, we were able to get through. There was more complexities to this as well with her actual condition, but it was tough, you know, and that was the situation where as soon as I was like, can she read or write? They're like, nope. And she looked at me scared, started crying, started puking. It's like, well, here we are.
But that's just a normal occurrence with every patient for you.
Yeah.
I mean, look at you and they start puking.
Yeah. Well,
common.
That's more Cody's mustache. But
Speaking of that, I got a pretty interesting story. So we got dispatched once to a cardiac arrest at a memory care facility. Okay, so we showed up, and this patient had a roommate as well who was sleeping in the bed peacefully. Had no idea we were there. We did compressions on this guy for a little bit, found a DNR, ceased all efforts, and that guy was still just dead asleep. So anyway, we
Interesting choice.
I was asleep.
That is not foreshadowing. Okay, so we turned it over to PD, we left, and about 20 minutes later, we get called back to that same exact room for chest pain. And I was like, oh no, is he alive? Uh-oh. So we go back, and well, our cardiac arrest patient was still lying there. PD was still, doing their investigation, but the roommate was awake and just yelling, and he was mad. And this is memory care. I'm not sure if he had dementia, but he's just yelling. He's mad. My chest
Another
hurts.
difficult patient.
Get me out. Yes, very difficult. Dementia can be very difficult. And he's just yelling. And in the back of my head is like, wow, your roommate is dead on the floor here, and you're just screaming at the top of your lungs, and he's getting mad at us for not moving him quick enough. And I'm trying to talk to him. I'm at his feet. Like, hey, can you keep your voice down? Like, have a dead body here. Family's here. Like, come on. Turns out he was blind. And once I figured that out, after I felt very bad, this is like bringing that frustration back and staying patient and staying respectful. I came up close to him, to his ear. I said, hey, sir, please stop yelling. Let's keep it quiet. We're going to get you out to the ambulance. We're going to give you a good evaluation. We're going to get you to the hospital. All I had to say, calm sentence and no more yelling. He just said, okay. And it was just like that. So I think if you can do whatever you can to make your patient feel comfortable and build a rapport, whether it's a language barrier, they can't see, they can't talk, they can't hear, you build a rapport, do whatever you can, and you gain your patient's trust, like, you're winning.
Yeah.
That was not the plot twist I thought was
Yeah. Sorry, I kind of.
I'd say dead asleep.
Yeah.
That's a good example too of like on these difficult patients, you try a tactic. If the tactic doesn't work, reevaluate, maybe try something different. It wasn't working talking from the foot of the bed. Mm-hmm. So like, let me get a little close. Oh, he's blind. Let me get a little close and let me talk a little closer to him. And maybe even just having you close just because he couldn't see you there.
Yeah,
right?
he probably had no idea who was talking from where.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And so, you reevaluated, you changed your tactic and you got a better outcome. And that's for everything that we do, right? Like, when we talk about reassessment again with students, they're like, do my vital signs. Like reassessment is what I'm doing working the way I want it to. If not, I need to change it. And so same thing with difficult patients.
Mm-hmm. This might not be the segue we want to go into, but dementia and memory care, that is extremely difficult. I don't know if you remember when I was a student and we had that one gal at a certain nursing home and she was hearing impaired and you and another provider were standing outside the room and I was just yelling at this lady who had dementia. Turns out she had no hearing aids in.
It's such an easy cycle to get into, though.
But I'm trying to be nice, and then I hear them just kind of chuckle into the background because I'm just louder, like, ma'am, and then finally I put the hearing aids in, and she looks at me and says, well, I'm going to go to sleep. It's like, okay, cool.
That's
and
right.
Then it was early during my internship as well. It was like, well, I learned a lot from that. Mm-hmm. Don't just yell at people who can't hear.
Worked for you on another call we were on.
Yeah, that's true. We'll talk about her later.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's move on to over talkative and under talkative patients. And that could be all sorts of different things, from this old lady who lives alone who just wants somebody to talk to somebody who just did a ton of stimulants and is just like high as a kite, just not stopping talking. You could have the other side, the under talkative. I feel like it's the stoic old war veteran is kind of like the one that we all know. But what do you guys have for that?
I think of the not talking of like the one who is potentially in police custody and they're keeping that plausible deniability alive, which it's like, I get it, but I'm trying to help you. There's got to talk to me.
Definitely times where whether they're over talkative or under talkative, sometimes it's fine, right? If they're over talkative and they just need someone to listen, right? You can just be there and listen to them. If it's a safety concern, so I can think of one in particular, very under talkative guy, suicidal ideations. And, as we talk about it, like, hey, do you have a plan? And I asked him, I said, are you suicidal? Yes. Do you have a plan? Yes. I'm going to walk into traffic. He's like, I also have homicidal ideations. Mind you, it's the two of us in the back of the ambulance with this guy. And you go, oh, okay, right now? And he goes,
Cool.
Yes.
Cool.
And so, like, that's the guy where you're like, okay, let's, like, build a rapport here and keep him talking. So I just had this circular conversation the whole time, all the way into the hospital, because in that instance, it was kind of a safety issue. So if it becomes, that kind of a safety issue, you got to get some more information out of them, build a rapport.
I also feel like stress and anxiety also makes these patients very over talkative, because they want to get everything out. They want you to know everything that's going on, and they overshare, they repeat, they kind of ramp up, their voice is really high. But they're super stressed and they're super anxious, and they have no idea if you're actually listening or if you're actually caring for them. And we have a gal that shows up quite often to our station, kind of same complaint every time, but she is just ramped up. Anxiety is through the roof. And the best thing to do is let her talk, listen to her, and then just let her know that you are there, you are caring for her. Again, it goes back to like building that rapport. But hear them out. And then I am a fan of interrupting at the right time, right? If they're repeating or if they're going on about pointless stuff that's not necessary to the conversation, I am fine with redirecting the conversation and asking a direct question. And, okay, tell me about that chest pain, and that's going to lead them into a new segue, and I wrap it right back. Does that chest pain radiate? Okay. How long has this shortness of breath been going on? And they start to talk about 6 months ago. Well, it started, no, today. Tell me about today. So you want to be respectful, but I am fine interrupting patients at appropriate times.
Yeah,
to redirect that conversation.
You have give them a task too. Sometimes I'll give them, like, hey, hold this nasal cannula here while I talk to you and hook you up to our monitor or whatever. And like Cody said, sometimes you do have to redirect the conversation. But yeah, if it's not working, try to make them do something for you. Give them some sort of task, or, hey, let's walk over to the ambulance. We'll talk more about this. Or, just kind of like let them talk, but move that call along. Okay, well, I'll hear more about this, but let's just get going to the hospital.
Right. And one thing I see with like newer responders is they haven't seen what we've seen for 5 years.
You haven't seen what I've seen.
Yeah, you haven't been where I've been, right? So they don't know, like, is this normal? Do we just let them talk because they're my patient and I'm just there to work for them, right? And you are almost nervous to interrupt somebody, right? Because it's rude. But you are there to do a job. You're there to service them. And on top of that, you're there to service everybody else in the city. So do what you have to do, get the pertinent information, service them, and maybe get them to the hospital.
I think that's a true skill to sorry, but learning to tactfully interrupt people. It is a skill.
It is a skill, and it's a great skill.
I hate you.
To tactically.
It's one of those.
You have to interrupt if needed.
I'm going to fight him. It's one of those things.
I'm serving you.
Servicing
you.
He's servicing.
You service the whole area, huh?
I'm sorry.
Please redirect the conversation. Can we get back on task?
Yeah.
So one other tactic that you can use for over-talkative patients that I think the book talks about too is you were kind of talking about direct questions, but we've all had the patient, especially the older patient. Like, so what were you doing when this started? Well, my granddaughter Susie called me. I was baking some cookies for her. She's a real sweet girl. She's in ninth grade. She loves soccer, and they'll just go forever if you give them those open-ended questions. So sometimes these over-talkative patients is where, like, do you have chest pain? Yes or no. Okay, did it start less than an hour ago? Like, really direct yes or no to keep them on track. If you give them an open road, they're just going to go for it. We need to give them very specific questions.
And I'll keep it conversational too, right? Once they go into that, oh, my daughter Susie this, and oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to ask. Did the chest pain start today? Right? So you're not coming off as so direct and rude.
Yeah. And then like the other end of things, if they don't give you enough information, it's that open-ended question, right? Which is probably where you're leading to. But one of the favorite questions I have, if they're not talking enough, is just, hey, walk me through your day. And so that's kind of a way it helps, gives you a lot of information of kind of their mental status and kind of, what they deem is really important to them. So, or what would you like the doctor to know, right? Or something
That's
like that.
a great
A lot of
question.
That is a good
information.
question.
What do you want me to tell the doctor?
Yeah.
There's a chapter in the book Communications, chapter 4, but there's one model they talk about, the Shannon-Weaver communication model, right? Like there's the sender, receiver, then there's noise. And I like to emphasize in my class, like noise can look like anything. Noise can be them not talking. Noise can be them talking too loud. Noise can be literal noise, right? And so understanding you're going to have to change your question types up is going to be important to know,
Or the way you assess patients.
Yeah. And going back to like what Chris was saying, if grandma is telling me all about her granddaughter, she's probably not that sick. Or something's probably not emergent. So I'll let her go on for a couple of minutes because, she probably is lonely. She probably wants to talk. And now I can take that deep breath and be like, okay, we are just in conversation mode. We don't need to get the pads ready. We can relax. We'll let her talk a little bit and we'll see what's going on. You want to go to the hospital or not? And then we kind of make our decision from there.
there to service her, right?
Servicing
Yes.
is service, yes.
Yeah, and it's really important too. Like, I know we're talking about how to deal with these patients, but you actually, like, somebody had a good example about, the suicidal ideations patient. Like, sometimes this can be a pretty significant finding we need to think about, right? If that patient is just not talking, maybe they're not just a grumpy old man. Maybe it's a stroke. Maybe they're like late stage shock or something, and they just are somehow able to sit up and their skin looks fine, but they're just so lethargic that they're not able to speak. Flip side, maybe there's something going on. Maybe they're super anxious because, we've probably all seen that, like, I'm going to die STEMI anxiety where maybe people are just a little...
Sorry, that's reminding me of a call.
Where people are just talkative because they're anxious and they just don't know how they don't know where it's coming from, but they just have this energy, this anxious energy they're getting out because they're talking fast and whatever because their chest hurts, and like you have to look to see maybe that's a symptom or a sign of what's going on.
100%.
Yeah, and I mean, you kind of mentioned like the stoic older people. Like if you work in a rural area, there's some stoic folks out there, and if they're talking to you, they could still be very, very sick. They're tough old folk.
It's something I've had to learn last year and a half flying is it's all extremely rural areas and some tough people for sure. So when they complain of something,
They love their privacy.
Yes.
And they don't want to talk much unless it's necessary.
Absolutely.
And that could be a cultural thing too that you might see of, of cultures that are a little bit more, like Scandinavian cultures or like that's what they're known for is just, they're very like brusque in how they speak. Like they don't use extra words. They're not about small talk. They're not going to talk about their grandma or their grandchild, right? Like, and so maybe that's just how they are culturally and just other things to keep into consideration, which, this shouldn't need to be said, but sometimes it needs to. Like other cultures are different. That doesn't mean they're wrong, right? Right. And ethnocentrism, I think is what it's called in the, that's not a good outlook. And you're going to run into these patients from all different cultures, and you need to, it helps to have an understanding of that and be respectful of that for all various reasons, right? Like I think the coining or cupping is a common thing that they bring up in the book, where, they'll put warm coins on their kids to help with muscle pain or something. And
they'll scrape them too with the coins.
Yeah, they'll do all sorts of stuff. Or cuppings, I feel like cupping's more common now. You see that in like the fitness community.
Therapeutic.
Yeah.
I like cupping.
You've done it before?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like, you look at somebody's back and it looks all bruised up, and maybe you're like, dude, what's going on with this? And no, it's a thing that we do. So if you have these patients, think about culturally, maybe there's something there. On to what I'm looking forward to, because I know you guys have some great stories, some kind of angry, violent patients. What do you guys have on those? What's some methods to help
don't antagonize for sure, which we've both been we both antagonized
not me
in the past.
No, not me.
You're perfect.
It's being that it goes back to being respectful, being patient, and it can be extremely tough at 3 a.m. You've been up all night and you're dealing with difficult patient after difficult patient. And I've been guilty of antagonizing it to a certain degree, obviously nothing egregious, but Cody and I have a pretty good story about.
Yeah. I'll say this too, like everybody has a different defense mechanism, for lack of a better term, right? Some patients, when they're having a medical emergency, are super anxious.
Yeah.
Some people get super angry. Some people just cry, right? Some people are actually just calm. So we deal with a lot of angry people because something's going on, and for whatever reason, your facial expression or the way you said something, or as long as it took you to get there,
Just your face.
just my face. Yeah, I got one of those faces apparently.
Both of us do.
Yeah.
for sure.
Mike and I, scene safety is real when Mike and I are together. Mike has saved my life. I know one time in the back of an ambulance. But we have to keep in mind they're angry because of whatever's going on in their life right now. It's not one thing I can't hammer enough is don't take anything personal.
No.
You might never see this person again. You have no idea what they're like before or outside of this medical emergency or trauma. So don't take it personal, like they are worried about themselves. With that being said, Mike and I were partners for a couple of years, and
We talk about dealing with difficult patients. We don't talk about dealing with difficult partners enough.
that's a whole other
Anyways.
podcast. Yeah, how much time
You might
we
have
got?
time. After.
But Mike and I, we worked downtown a lot, and our population downtown is typically drunk kids, for the college, or the homeless. And the homeless are, I'd say, they're fine. They're fine, but they're homeless. They're already sad. They're already angry. They don't have the same access to health care like we do, and they probably push a lot of stuff off, right? Because they're just embarrassed to go in, whatever it is, egos. And so when they call an ambulance, a lot of providers don't take them very serious. Oh, are you hungry? So you called 911. Who knows how sick they actually are, right? And sometimes the
Very
only way,
sick population overall, too.
and sometimes the only way they can get to the hospital is if they say, "I have chest pain," to actually be taken serious, which is kind of sad. It's a cultural thing, right? So anyway, Mike and I work downtown a lot, so that's kind of our typical patient response. And we kind of went to an area where the homeless go to eat and whatnot. And it's kind of between two cement walls, and it's kind of tight. And we were going through it, and
Multiple times.
multiple times that day. It was a very, very busy day. I believe it was super hot or something. It was
Like
just
the 4th of July.
Yeah, 4th of July was just one of those days. And when we go down there, we're really not respected. And that's another thing, like not taking things personal, right? We took it a little bit personal. And a guy,
Not our brightest moment.
a few times people would walk right in front of the ambulance like we weren't there. It's very frustrating because, if that patient was sick, now we're stopping while somebody is slowly walking across, right? And it's annoying. And so I think it was like the third time we were there, and it happened again. This guy walks right in front of us, but instead of crossing the road, he just turned straight and was just walking in front of us, leading us basically very slowly. And Mike and I were about at our wits' end, and I go to roll the window down to tell this guy, like, get out of the way. And before I could push that window button, Mike has a bright idea to just honk at him, right? But not horn, air horn him.
In my defense, I thought this would be a very slight, like,
Yeah, it wasn't. So being in this like cement box too, with all these homeless people
So like
just
an
hanging out.
alley.
an alley.
Yeah, I
There's
mean
a
it's
word for like a
No.
road between two
That-
walls.
It's a
It's a
word.
street.
It's an alley,
It is a street,
It's a
but yeah,
street.
it's between a building and another
but
building.
with these reinforced concrete walls, it created a box. And that air horn echoed probably 3 times of how loud it was. And all these people sitting on the side just jump up because they're scared to death. And that is not foreshadowing either. No scared to death. And they were immediately angry. So Mike and I park, and I kind of look at Mike like, "Are you trying to kill me?" And I open the door, and about 10 people are coming up here yelling profanity. "We're gonna kill you! See, I remember your face." And I remember one guy specifically just staring me in the eyes, like, "You better watch your face. You better watch your face." I was like, "I don't know what that means, but you are terrifying, right?" So anyway, fast forward.
The firefighter saved us.
The firefighters did go and save us, and we just took off and found the patient, and we got out of there because I'm pretty sure these guys know us pretty well at this point. So what, for like 4 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah.
We go back, and
No sleep.
No sleep. It's hot. We've been coming back to this spot over and over and over and over again, right? Again, it's so easy to say like, well, it's your job, be patient, but like to a point we're all human and frustration is real. So we go there and it's no other than the guy who was staring me down and said, "You better watch your face." Oh, gosh. And this guy has gone to the hospital the last 3 days, right? We can see that on record. And we're like, same thing last night, same thing the night before, same thing. Okay, what's going on today? What do you say?
Abdominal pain. My stomach hurts.
Abdominal pain. My stomach hurts. I'm like, okay. And he goes, "I want to kill myself." Like,
it's not funny.
Yeah, don't laugh at that.
Yeah, well, he just added it at the end. He needed to get to the hospital. I think he was trying everything.
Little sprinkles.
Hey, you know what? We're going to take you. All right. I said, "Is this the same thing as from last night?" Which then made him mad. Anyway, so we gather up his gear. He had a ton of bags, ton of equipment with him, and the walker. So we're kind of loading the ambulance.
He's also 30 years old.
He's 30 years old, and we're like, "All right, sit down on the bench, okay? We can tell physical examination. This guy's not sick, okay?"
We did do a physical.
We did
assessment.
a good assessment.
We did our job.
We talked with where he was staying, and they said he's been fighting people, he's been yelling at people, he's being kicked out. So he asked us to call 911. Okay, that's the story. We're not going to fight it. We're just going to take him to the hospital. It's right down the road. So we get him in the back, and I tell him to sit down, and he's not on the gurney. Put him in a seatbelt, right? And he says something like, no, his original complaint was chest pain. He said, "Oh, man, my stomach's hurting. I'm going to throw up." I said, "I thought you said your chest was hurting." He said, "No, mother effer, you need to listen to me. I said my stomach." And I said, "Okay, I'm sorry." So I give him a vomit bag. And he said, "No, I want to get on the gurney." I was like, "Hey, man, we're like 3 minutes from the hospital. Like, you can walk. You're good. We're going to get all your bags. We're good. You're good where you're at." He said, "No, I want to get on that profanity gurney." I was just, again, frustration has set in. I'm exhausted. And I was like, "No, you're going to sit right there." And he threw that vomit bag. He said, "This is why I don't like you two." Mike's in the front chuckling, right? And, I asked him too. I was like, "Hey, are you going to be cool with us? Like, earlier today you were saying something about killing me. Like, I don't need to get the cops, right?" And he goes, "Nah, man, no hard feelings." I was like, "All right, we're good." We were not good. So we get in there, and I'm basically fighting him the whole time. Like, "You're not getting on the gurney. You're okay. We're going to walk into the hospital. We got a bunch of bags to take in because we want to pack the whole thing up. So you're going to help us." So we get to the hospital, and he stands up, and he says, "I'm getting on that gurney." I said, "You're on your 2 feet. Why don't you just walk out, and we'll walk into the hospital?" And I think he reiterated, like, "I hate you guys." Okay, so he grabs his walker, and he's trying to get out of the door, but he can't get it. And he's just getting more mad, cussing and whatnot. And so Mike comes around the corner and just kind of one hand grabs it from him and puts it out. And I think that made him more mad.
Very nicely.
Yeah, he was very nice, but just the fact that Mike did it so simply, right? And he turns around, and I've got all of his bags. And he goes, "Oh, thanks." "Yeah, you're welcome," right? It's like nothing had happened. So we go inside, and like I said, he's been in the hospital the last 3 days. And he walks in and goes something like, "Special delivery, mother." And the nurses are like, "Oh my gosh, go to room 4. And he knows exactly where it's at. He just kind of walks over there. So we go up, and we're like, he's pretty aggressive. And we're talking to him, and he's sitting on the bed, right? But we can only see his side profile, right? So he's not even like looking at us. Doesn't care what we're saying. We're like, "Hey, man, better be nice to these nurses. Like, they don't deserve to be the way you talk to us." He's just kind of taking it in, and we're like, "Because they'll get the cops." And he goes, he doesn't even look at us. Mike and I are standing in the doorway. Registration gal's there. He goes, "Yeah, whatever. See ya, virgins." And
He won.
He won. He got it. Yeah. And Mike and I had no idea what to say. We had no comeback. And I think the registration girl was like, "Oh."
It was bad. Everybody knew it. We were defeated.
We just kind of walked out with the tail tucked between our legs, and we're like, he's got the best of us.
I have not seen him since that day.
Me
I've never
either.
been able to have some sort of rebuttal either.
Yeah,
That was it. He won. He
He
disappeared
has won, yeah.
into thin air.
He lives in your mind rent free.
Oh, yeah. 100%. That's where
I
he's
still
at.
think about him every day.
I
That
still
walker
wake
right
up
over
at
there
night,
reminds
yeah.
me of him.
I'm
So-
not a virgin.
I got a question for you now that you guys are more experienced providers. Would you have changed anything? Like, because as you're telling the story for me, like,
It was not our brightest moment.
3 times you want to get on the gurney, like,
Yeah,
and
get on
maybe
the
maybe
get on
because
the gurney, Cody.
I mean, sometimes it's like dealing with like kids, right? Like, it's not going to hurt anybody.
Just do it.
100%.
Just get on the gurney. I'm going to give you what you want, but like, hey, I don't like how you're talking to me and my partner right now. I'm going to let you get on the gurney, but that needs to stop, right? We don't just acquiesce to everything that a patient tells us to do.
100%. But how simple is
I
it to
wouldn't
just,
have
okay,
done
sit
the air
down.
horn, I'll tell you that much.
Well, yeah.
that was the lowest moment of like antagonizing patients I think I've ever had, and I would not do that again. That's for sure.
It was a long day.
It was a long
If you
day.
take anything away from this podcast, when you're in an alleyway with a bunch of people sitting on it, don't hit the air horn. It's not going to work out well for you.
Just roll the window down. Hey, could you get out of the way?
Excuse me.
Thank you.
But I think that story also speaks like it's frustrating. There are
yeah.
people who are going to grind every last gear you got, and that's not even, it's hot, right? There's people don't make good choices when they're hot typically. Now imagine you're hot 16-hour day, middle of the night, no sleep. I level with it. I know where you guys are coming from. But in hindsight, when you say it out loud, it's like,
Right.
oh, maybe
It
I
sounds
shouldn't have
bad.
done that. Yeah.
It does sound bad, yeah. And we're service members. This is what we signed up for. This is what we get paid to do. So if you got to get yelled at, you got to get yelled
do
at.
it.
I will say, though, that there is a point, like you kind of mentioned earlier, everyone's got kind of a breaking point. Like, we are public servants. We're not public beating bags. You have the right to defend yourself and say things appropriately.
Yeah, there's a line. Like, I mean, the same probably month. The guy I got kicked in the face, right, by a patient with him making a joke. Didn't go well. Got kicked in the face. So it's not okay to take.
Right.
Yeah, it was. I didn't think it was. It wasn't like I wasn't making fun of him, but I said Cody ate all my snacks. That was it. The guy didn't like it. Kicked me in the face. Anyways, there's a point where you can't accept the abuse, both verbally and physically, from a patient. So there is definitely a line. Everybody's line is a little different. I think everybody at this table has taken a lot from patients, and especially Cody, from patients in the past. But there is a line where it's not okay. So
Yeah. I mean, we could tell that story now about the line in the sand and having to defend yourself. Me and Mike were working on a shift together. And
why am I the common denominator in a lot of these?
I don't know. Yeah, maybe you need a little bit of self-reflection here about this.
He puts you in these situations.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. Uncomfortable all the time. But we are dispatched to assist police. We get there, and I'm trying to talk to her, and she's fired up. And finally, she says I want to kill myself. It's like, well, there it is. You're with the police. You're on an involuntary hold. You need to go to the hospital. And so we're getting her on the cot, and they're going to put a spit hood on her. And I said, well, hold on. Let me talk to her first. Let me just see. And I was like, hey, just so you know, if you keep this up, we're going to put this hood on you. And she's like, well, I can't breathe if you put that on me. I don't want it. I was like, well, are you going to spit? She's like, well, no. It's like, okay, I'm trusting you. So we rolled her in. Now, we also had a student at this time who was in the ambulance at that point. And I believe at one point you did the typical Mike's in when I need someone to be sedated, he's going to turn and disappear into the darkness. Yeah. So that's, of course, what he did. So this gal's sedated. We're waiting for this sedation to start kicking in. And so we're rolling her into the back of the rig. We close the doors. Well, the student was inside. So as we're walking around, this gal he's raping me, he's sexually assaulting me. She is yelling just the most profane things that we could think of. And it was like, at a certain point, the student literally pokes his head out with his hands out and is like, I'm not doing anything, right? So it's like, okay. So I get in there and I'm trying to diffuse the situation, and then I finally had it. I snapped on her. I'm not proud of the fact that I yelled at her, but I did yell at her. I did get her to calm down, but what really grounded me in that moment was when I said, do we understand each other? And she said, yeah, dude, chill out. Like, that was like, me, you, right? And so
You don't tell me to chill out.
Back too.
was so
I've
fired
never
up.
seen Wade like that. It's just
I snapped on her because it was like she was just saying the most egregious stuff, and
bad.
it was like, this is not happening, and you're putting us all at legal risk at this point. Good thing we got cameras and obviously bystanders. And so after the call, I asked the students, like, did you learn anything today? He's like, yeah, yell at my psych patients. I was like, no, that's not the takeaway. But then he used a term that we've coined ever since, emotional cardioversion. Brought it right back down to baseline.
I think it was
nice
like my little poke and pray of sedation, but
yeah, every time he sneaks up, it's like, boop. Because I look at him like, yep, and boop, and then into the distance. Leaves you with it.
Yeah, Mike and I were working together again. This is getting interesting. We're working together, and we went to another homeless housing facility, and the guy was pretty cool, hanging out in his wheelchair, just fine. Wanted to go to the hospital. I don't remember the reason why. Got him in the back of the ambulance. The fire department was there. And Mike was sitting
Behind him.
Yeah, behind him, kind of at his head. I was sitting right next to him, like he's looking right at me. And I asked him one question. Couldn't even tell you what I asked, but I think it was, how long has this been going on? And this guy immediately, big guy, cocked his fist back and up, had his body coming up and was right about to knock me in the face. And that's when as much as I hate to say this, my savior, Mike Zinn, grabs the guy, pulls his arm down. I'm on the radio. Hey, and I think it was Engine 5. Engine 5, can you come back and help us out? We put the guy in restraints, and then I'm just like flustered. I was mad. Mike was driving us to the hospital. I had a firefighter ride with me. And the calm conversation the firefighter had with him and just talking to him like he was like an actual human being, right? Like I was just so mad that this guy just tried to hit me. But the firefighter was building a rapport, giving him respect, right? This guy's homeless, probably doesn't think we're taking him seriously. It's 2:00 in the morning. This firefighter handled it very, very well. And he looked at me and said, "Are you okay if we take these restraints off?" And I was like, "You want to?" Took the restraints off. Guy was the nicest guy I've ever met. Just completely calm, but it's because that firefighter showed him how much he actually cared about him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, building a rapport goes really far. Mm-hmm. And kind of coming back to like another thing, because I always try to loop it back to students, right? Because that's who I'm assuming is listening to this in large part. You have to almost have like a couple different personalities when you're out in the field to deal with different patients. Like I'm super laid back and mellow, but when I need to be, like I'll get up and aggressive in people's faces. And sometimes you need to learn when to pull that out to stem it so it doesn't get any further. Like I'm not going to name drop here, but somebody we all know that we worked with that's like the sweetest, like 45-year-old mom, right? Like that you could ever imagine that I was FTOing her and we were on a call where there's a patient who was, I think, in a car accident. We weren't sure if it was like a diabetic thing or if they were on drugs. We're like, have them in the back. We're doing an assessment. And he like cursed her or something, like aggressively said something really vulgar at her. And like, I got up and it started to get up in his face to be like, you do not talk to my partner like that, like shutting it down early. And this sweet little mom stood up and she's like, "Don't you dare!" And just like got up in his face and just knocked it out right then. Is that always the right tactic? Definitely not. You need to learn when to build that rapport and when to not let them step all over you. But when you're new, I know when I was new, I would get stepped over all the time and people would just be able to say whatever they wanted. And so it's something that you need to start to learn to stand up for yourself when that's appropriate.
Yeah. Finding that line.
Yeah. And having that like,
and keep in mind, how effectively can you do your job when somebody is saying something vulgar to you and disrespectful and yelling over the top of you? So yeah,
pretty great at it.
Yeah. You do need to figure out when the appropriate time is to almost demand your respect.
Yeah.
Obviously, you don't get physical with your patient, right?
Yeah,
we're not trying to big dog them.
Some people, that's what they'll respond. Like they'll only respond to that kind of, not power is not the right word, but
confrontational
aggression
energy.
a little bit, right?
Aggression,
like, or else, you're not going to get anything done or get anywhere with these patients or get any real information.
Important thing is,
don't do that.
We work up to that, though.
Yes,
right.
Oh, for sure,
100%. We work up to that. We don't come out the gate swinging. Yeah. But for that patient, where you get him on the gurney and you're talking to him, and it's just working up, says something vulgar. Now it's time to step in.
Yeah, I like
Not
to
the bash bros out there.
Not anymore. That was I tell students all the time, like I have put patients at my choice in restraints, I think twice in a 10+ year career. One time was because
it's a rookie.
I'm above the average.
Got to pump those numbers up.
I'm just like one time was because a cop was frustrated with a drunk guy and just body slammed him on my gurney, and then it just became a big old fight. But and I'm just a big proponent of like I take the time, I build that rapport, even if somebody's upset. What's going on, man? Let me listen. Like I'm here to help you out. Try to calm them down, and I've been really successful with it, right? Like
100%.
And if I think
Verbal judo.
yeah,
100%.
yeah, take that time, build that rapport. You can get really far with it, but sometimes it's just not going to work, and sometimes you need to go the other way and chill. I'm the boss. I'm in charge right now. This is my ambulance, my fire engine, my scene, and you're going to respect me and my partner, and they're going to be like, "Oh, okay. And then they become super nice and super easy to deal with.
And kill them with kindness.
And like we're talking about all these calls. It might sound like this happened like constantly. Like we ran thousands of calls a year, right? And this is, one or
Handful.
two a year, maybe, right? And so it doesn't happen like all the time. So it's not like you have to go in every call like, oh, I'm waiting for him to say something, right? And so ultimately it's going back, treat him with patience or treat him with respect, have patience, treat your medical, do your medical job first and foremost, right? We're here to do a job. We're not here to, argue with people or, things like that. So stick to your basics, get them to the hospital.
I think one thing that helps is understanding that it's not always volume either, right? Like I remember one call, I don't even remember the circumstance, but I know it was with you and you busted out the dad voice on somebody. And it was one of those where even I was like, like the mom dad voice, whatever it is, use the tone of like, listen, I'm not here to screw around. I'm here to do my job. And it's not about being the loudest voice. It's about being the most, important one in that moment.
Yeah. My kids both had the same kindergarten teacher, and I love to tell this story. Like, shout out Mrs. Clough. She's the best. But she would have this room full of kindergarten kids, right? And just her tone that she could do, they'd be all crazy, whatever. And she would go, kindergarten. And then, instant silence. Yes, Mrs. Clough. Like she just had that power. And she wasn't loud. She wasn't aggressive. It was just that tone that they knew, like, this is serious, right? And I think being a parent does help with that, but you start to learn that. I'm sure all of us at this table have that tone that they can bring out sometimes. Not loud, not aggressive, just like, you're listening to me. This is, I'm in charge right now, that you can bust out. That it takes a while to learn.
Is that why you're always like, Cody?
Why did you look every time?
That always gets me. No, but I wanted to go back, like what Wade was saying with Chris is like, you learn how to do this job while doing the job.
Absolutely.
So you will see when your partner steps up, who's been doing it a while, and gets into the patient's phase or draws the line. You then pick up on that, like, okay, that's not okay. That's where I'm going to draw the line, right? Or I've seen partners draw the line way too early in the call and ruin the entire outcome.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
for sure.
And then you take that mental check, like, that was way too early. I am not going to do that.
That didn't need to go the way it did. Right?
I'm a big proponent of de-escalating, and I've worked with a lot of people that love to escalate.
In my career, I've literally only 2 patients that I've had to yell at, and it was because they pushed every button that I had until it was like, listen, dude, I got nothing left. I can't just talk to you through this. Like I agree. Like if you can just talk your way through a situation, most people, even if they're scared or anxious, they're going to listen if you're willing to help.
Yeah. Next time, just try like saying their name. John. Corey.
John, I'm here to service you. It worked really well. Right?
Write that one down.
Yeah.
I love this job.
So
I love it. It's hot in here. Nobody serviced the AC.
It's like firefighters.
And one thing to really be in mind too, like I've had partners where I had to step them back and really like restore that whole situation. Another guy we would all know, we're all buddies with him, we all worked with him, that it was like 3 seconds away from like a real scrap in the back of the ambulance where like fists were about to get thrown, that I had to be like to my partner, like, dad voice, you stop outside now, out of the ambulance. I'm shutting this down. Took over the call. And then everything was chill after that. But sometimes you might have to step in because your partner, it just gets away from them. Like Mike has that face that nobody likes for some reason. And maybe sometimes you might have to stop in.
Is there something I can do about that?
You need a mustache.
He had one until recently.
Not about that mustache. Oh, God.
Your girlfriend likes it.
That's called a mustache?
Do you floss the thing?
Yeah, floss it.
You guys are giving me a lot of work later to edit this.
Let's get back on
Or
track.
are we giving you lots of 1-minute clips?
There might be a lot of good stuff, a lot of good nuggets.
But it can be super tough when you're new to stand up to your partner, right?
Yeah.
But if you see something that's going to affect everybody's safety on a call, that's like a non-negotiable from day one. It's
100%.
expected that you say something if it's going to affect you, your partner, or your patient. That's something you need to be okay with day one saying something. And
I mean, it's pretty obvious you guys have spent a lot of time together. You know, part of this job is taking care of each other. I mean, this is not a field where you survive on your own. It's just not. Yeah. You'll lose it one way or the other. Take care of your friends.
Too much time together.
You know, there are lines. We found it. You guys passed it a long time ago.
So
but
there's the line.
Take care of each other, because if you take care of each other, you're going to have a longer career and you're going to be happier for it. You know, you've seen a lot of people, they spiral into that burnout because they get so sick of it, and then they don't get called out because everyone knows what they're doing is not appropriate, but you know,
and it can even be, and I've had those conversations with partners where like, what's going on today, right? You're just not yourself. And it turns into this whole like, oh, well, I've got this and this and this going on at home. And they have a lot of other stuff happening that can be the same with our partners. That can be the same with our patients. We don't know what everybody's going through. So treat them with respect, and, you know, don't take anything personally, because you don't know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a situational thing. It's very, very rarely directed at us personally. They're just frustrated with the situation, and maybe just even the healthcare system in general.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you know, we've all been on those patients who, maybe they don't want to go back the third time in a week, but they keep going and the same issue's going on. And not that the hospital or whatever is not trying. Maybe they just can't find anything, and it's just this cycle. And unfortunately, we're going to be put in that crosshair of like, we are the representation of what's failing them at that moment, and they're going to take it out on us. Doesn't mean they're bad people. You know, like, just don't take it personally. It's not you, and just move on from it.
Redirect the conversation to build rapport.
And then develop that thick skin. I mean, look at both of you guys, right? That's some pretty terrible things said to you before, and you're still doing it. So I don't know if it's because you're dumb or you got thick skin.
That's the definition of insanity.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Just waiting for that breaking point everybody's been talking about.
I keep trying with him.
Yeah.
All right. Let's wrap it up with one more thing to talk about that I think is important. And that's going to be refusal patients. Because this is, you know, we all like to tell our students, right? Like, it's not the patients you take to the hospital that are the legal scary ones. It's the ones that don't go to the hospital, because it's real defensible to take a patient who agrees to go to the hospital and something bad happens. You're like, well, we did our job. We got them to a higher level care. It's when you don't take them that you're really, you know, you're hanging out in the wind, that maybe you can get some legal issues and all that kind of stuff.
Liability skyrockets.
I've got a spiel on this one.
Hit it.
If you don't mind. So this, refusals, this is something that, obviously learning as you do this job for a long time, how important they are, right? Especially, I've been to court. I've had to defend refusals before. So I take them very seriously. And I had kind of a system for myself, as well as teaching my trainees, teaching academies, that kind of thing. So kind of the way I handle refusals, it's okay if people refuse. I think something that people do is they don't want anybody to refuse. They're so scared of them, but it's okay if they are of sound decision-making capacity, can answer your questions appropriately, can make those medical decisions, right? Once you've determined that, and that's a whole nother lecture of determining that, right? I always will offer them a ride to the hospital, right? No matter if I think they need it or not, I'm always going to offer them a ride to the hospital. If they refuse it, I'm going to explain to them in full detail why they should go to the hospital, specific to what's going on, whether it's a head injury, whether it's a cardiac issue. I'm going to tell them the signs and symptoms of what they may have, what they could develop, or if they develop that they need to call us back. And so I'm going to tell them, not only why they should go to the hospital, the risks of not going to the hospital very specifically, and then I'm going to offer another ride to them again after I've explained it all to them. And then after that, you've offered them 2 rides to the hospital. You've explained the risks of refusal, the reasons they should go to the hospital, and that they can call you back. If as soon as we leave, they can call you back. And then the last thing I'll do, if I really think, and I do this for everybody, I make them explain to me what I told them, right? So that I can understand that they know what I'm talking about. And then at that point, if I really think they need to go to the hospital, I get super cheap about it. I'll use their family members. I'll use like anybody on scene. I get pretty cheap. Like, do you want your daughter here to come find you on, I will get dirty with it essentially, to get them to go to the hospital. And then I'll, if I still really need to, my last Hail Mary is like, hey, everybody's entitled to make a bad decision. This is a bad decision. And so sign here if you don't want to go to the hospital. And so that's kind of the last thing I leave them with, and that is
This is
very
where I
effective.
get punched in the face.
And then I go, hey, Cody, have him sign.
Yeah, I'll be in the ambulance.
And so then you sign, and then you have to document it very thoroughly afterwards. But that has worked extremely well for me for many years, including in court. So that's something that I've done for a long time.
And you're always going to be defensible trying to be an advocate.
Exactly.
You're always and
do the right thing.
I think kind of backtracking to like everyone wants everyone to go to the hospital. The way I talk to a lot of my students is based on where you're at in your careers, which they're students, so they're not there yet. Everyone in your mind should be going until you learn how to do this the right way. And I can't teach you to do this the right way until you see what the situations look like, feel like. We can talk about it, but until it's specific and you see it visually or viscerally even, it's tough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree though. Like patients can refuse.
Yeah.
Right. We have no idea what their financial or who's going to watch their kids or who's going to watch their pets. Like we have no idea. So
Pet squirrels too.
And pet squirrels. And so when people want to refuse, I think it's so important that we're like, hey, one of my favorite things to say is we take you down to the hospital. It's about 8 minutes away, 10 minutes away. They're going to evaluate you. If everything is fine, you come back home. Okay. But if something is wrong, you're at the ER. And that's when it's like, oh yeah, I don't want to go and wait and sit around. Well, the ER is busy. It's packed. And they want those rooms for patients who really need it. So if you need to be there, you're going to be really happy you're there. But if you don't really need to be there, I promise you, they will let you come back home. And they're like, oh, okay, we'll just go get checked out. But the caveat to that is ambulance rides are expensive. And what our company does is we have no idea how much it costs because we don't want money to interfere with your care, right? So, well, how much is it going to cost me? I actually don't know. I only care about you right now. So you got to kind of play both roles because I've had tons of friends come up to me. Well, I went to the hospital the other day. It was $3,000 or whatever it was. And I'm like, oh, that hurts, man. And nothing was wrong. Like I had some anxiety. Well, it's better to know than not, and I'm really sorry, but that is a financial burden, right? Part-time workers, single parent, everything. So if I truly think they need to go to the hospital, in my clinical opinion, I'm going to give them the rundown just like Mike did. And then in charting wise and like not getting sued wise, you document every single word and you get every possible signature. But we do need to keep in mind that like it is their right to refuse.
Yeah, there's definitely times where you're like, this patient does not need to go to the hospital. They're not going to get the full court press every time.
No, if a paramedic is like, no, really, you need to go to the hospital. Because I would rather go back and watch some football at my station than drive you to the hospital. Like if I'm like, hey, no, you really need to go. You probably should go to the hospital.
And that, like, also being a partner advocate too, right? Like working with Mike, if he's giving him that spiel, I'm also going to chime in and say, hey,
same team.
This guy is not going to convince you that hard unless you actually need to go. Like he's not going to beat around the bush. Like if this guy's trying this hard, I promise you, he's seeing something that you're not.
Yeah. I think another thing too is, definitely give them the press. If they need to go, they need to go. But if you have the person who's like, well, I don't know, like, and we're not seeing anything life threatening, but it's one of those, you should probably go just
you were my grandma.
Right. You could use that.
Throw you over my
give them
shoulder.
options. If you give options, you tend to get better compliance. Like, we're going to be your safest route. I think that would be the best bet. That said, if you have, your friend here is comfortable taking you, that's a route. You can still get there, and that kind of bypasses our ambulance charges.
Totally.
Do that all the time.
And and then the last one, if you don't want anything, you don't have to go. You're a grown up. You make your own choices. I can't take you where you don't want to go. But by reiterating the options, giving people choices, even if it's like just 3, they're like, well, if that's my only 3 options, then I guess I'll go with B. Like it kind of hones in from more of an open segment to like, okay, these are your choices now.
And one thing I've noticed is people get really embarrassed to call 911. So embarrassed. And so when we're leaving and they're refusing, like Mike was saying, I make them feel very comfortable about calling back. I say, I don't care if I shut the ambulance door and something in your mind changes. You promise you're going to call me back.
Yep.
And it's like, oh,
It'll be bad to deal with that. I mean, that happens all the time. So it's just part of the gig.
Yep.
Yeah. One thing I like to do with those patients that are refusing that I don't think should refuse is ask why. And because it's kind of coming back to what you're saying, right? So we can maybe put those things to rest. Like, well, because, my pets, like, okay, well, I've got 3 other people here. is there somebody we can call to come over and take care of your dog and feed your dog? Because if that's the only thing,
There's 8 neighbors watching us pull up to this house right now.
exactly.
I said there's 7 cars in the driveway. Where is everybody at?
So we can maybe mitigate that, but we need to find out what the reason is. And so that's something I've done in the past. Like, so why I think you need to go, why don't you want to go? And unfortunately, a lot of the time it is a financial thing.
Yeah.
Like, I just can't afford to do it.
That's the toughest one to.
How do you fight that?
Yeah. What are you going to say? That it is what it is. Like, there's nothing.
Move to another
I
country
always
after
do is
this.
that your health is more important than your financials, right?
I did pull out the stop one time for, I'm not going to go into the full story, but it's a head injury, and they needed to go. They were alert oriented enough to answer, and it was like, well, it's pretty hard to complain about finances if you're dead.
Yeah.
And it was a really callous.
Sometimes you
way of
have to get
saying it,
very
but,
direct,
Yeah,
especially
I'm
with
not-
refusals.
Don't want to be morbid, but like,
Hit
it's
you.
a fact of
I'll
life.
hit you in the heart.
Yeah.
Literally.
And that's me pressing, right? Like, that's my last.
Oh, yeah.
These
Hail
people's
Marys.
dogs on them
Yeah,
too.
I'm not
you know?
leading with that one. Like, hey, by the way,
Do you want to leave Lucky without
do
a
you
parent?
want, yeah, your dog here. You want, yeah. It's like they're worried about someone taking care of their dog. Like, you got to be around for your dog too, right? And that is, believe it or not, worked a time or two.
pull the heartstrings.
You have to. You get good at reading people, and you have to kind of use that against them. It's manipulative, but
Oh yeah, for sure.
For the best purposes.
for a good
though.
purpose,
Yeah.
for being a patient advocate.
Sometimes you got to get creative.
Yeah.
And that's the full circle.
Speaking of getting creative, one other thing you guys, I think maybe somebody mentioned this too, that you guys maybe have done before. Yeah, you thought. I finished the show.
We're doing
finished when I
another
say we're
circle outside of my circle.
Another option that we go through with students all the time, and in their mind, medical control is to tell me I can give aspirin or not, right? That's all medical control is for. I have had patients before where this is not only just to push them, but also for charting liability purposes, where I've been like, you need to go. There was one specifically I can remember that was a diabetic that was like not taking care of their diabetes, but was not to the point where we could just forcibly make him go. They were still alert and oriented. But when I said, I don't want to come back and find you dead later, I was serious because I was concerned that was going to be the case. And after 30 minutes of me and my partner back, come on, let's just go, whatever. We were doing the family thing. Family was there, just refusing. Finally, I was like, I just called into medical control and I was like, here's the situation. Can you talk to this patient? Because maybe your word will hold more weight than my will with this patient. And they were a little bit like, sure, I guess. But they talked to the patient. And the patient told them to pound sand. I'm not going to the hospital. And the doctor's like, well, they're like, there's nothing else we can do. Like, you guys do what you can. And so I was able to chart that down that patient spoke with Dr. blah, blah, blah at this time from this hospital. Patient continues to refuse. So that's another tactic above beyond what we have that you can do when you're out there. We're talking about resources. We forget medical control. I'm sure all of us will call medical control, be like, help. Like, what do I do?
So I did BSI and CSA. I don't really know where to go from here.
What's the A mean? What's next?
Here, just talk to him.
Yeah.
It's kind of similar. I had a patient. It wasn't my call, but I was with another medic, and we both took cracks with this guy. And he was so hypotensive. I can't remember the number, but he was that so pale he almost started turning yellow. like Raynaud's pale. And me and my partner, like, it was his call. He's trying to convince, and he's getting frustrated. So I'm like, well, I'll back him up. And then, great resource, use spouses.
Oh, yeah.
This guy's wife was like, well, what if we call your doctor? And his doctor on speakerphone said exactly what me and my partner said. And he's like, you're making a lot of sense. You should go to the hospital.
I've never heard
so
that
then we
before.
ended up
Thanks,
taking
doc.
it. And it's like, so sometimes if it's not medical control, if you can get their personal care provider, if it's something like this guy recently had a surgery. So it's like, call at any time. We called him. Sure enough, that convinced him. Use the resources can be not just medical control, but spouses, friends, bystanders.
And to circle it back.
And circle
Get
it.
Be creative.
Basically EMS on 3. Just kidding.
Maybe if Mike did it, but not if you
Yeah,
did.
for sure.
I think that's about all we got. And I think we're pretty over the time we were shooting for anyways. So, we'll have to get this group back together. It's a fun group to talk to. I was really excited to hear the So Long Virgin story because we all know the same patient. I've been on the same patient. Like, I love that story.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thank you guys for being here. We got a big flight medic and firefighter who's slumming it to come down and hang out with us today. So,
Happy to be here.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, no problem.
We'll catch everybody on the next one. Check us out as always: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, whatever. And now, Wade, you can do your finger guns.